This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Remembering Bush 41, one of the more memorable moments was after he lost the presidential election in 1992, the Christmas party at the White House, his final one. And he invites Dana Carvey.
That's so awesome.
Of course.
It was on C-SPAN, the whole thing, 20 minutes long.
Made his mark in part on parroting, impersonating Bush, and in the 1992 cycle, Bush and Perot. And Dana Carvey took to the dais to explain how you do a George Herbert Walker Bush impersonation.
The way to do the president is to start out with Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Then you add a little John Wayne. Here we go. Let's go over the ridge. You put them together. You got George Herbert Walker Bush. That's the thing there.
Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
And he had all the hand gestures down. He's
course.
like, there, and the hitchhiker one.
1,000 points to
1,000 points, yep.
Yeah.
But I mean,
bar. I mean,
in this day and age, you would never have President Trump invite Alec Baldwin to the White House for anything, let alone a Christmas party, to make fun of him.
No.
That would not be tolerated.
And H.W. sort of made that point and really provided some foreshadowing of where this was going to go, different than what it was during his time.
Dana's given me a lot of laughs. He said to me on the phone, "You sure you really want me to come there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I hope I've never crossed the line." And I knew exactly what he meant, and as far as I'm concerned, he never has. And the fact that we can laugh at each other is a very fundamental thing. I'm not sure on November 4th that the invitation would have gone out and had the same enthusiasm, but we're shifting gears, and I think he's given us a wonderful kickoff to what I hope will be a joyous, totally friendly, very happy, somewhat nostalgic.
Talking about Christmas, and it's a couple things President Bush said there. One, just the idea that you have to be open to ridicule, you laugh at yourself, an appreciation for Dana Carvey's comedic skills and a recognition that it wasn't vitriolic. But the second thing is just the ability and the freedom to laugh, to parody, to ridicule. I mean, that's part of a free society. And that's certainly increasingly under assault from the cultural Marxist left.
President Bush's last public act came last month when he voted, and I don't know if you saw, he was, in his wheelchair wearing his signature socks, and he had his service dog, Sully, next to him, who, by the way, is now going to go back to Walter Reed Hospital, but he's had Sully since June, since the passing of his wife, Barbara.
There's also something else I want to make sure we mention again, post-presidency 41. The note he left Bill Clinton on the day Bill Clinton entered the Oval Office, January 23rd, 1993. The key line, "Your success now is our country's success. I'm rooting hard for you." The relationship he developed with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, they teamed up to help, global relief efforts.
But how different it was, the lesson that 41 set for 43, and not necessarily, it was adopted by 43 in terms of post-presidency, not so much by 42 or 44. Maureen Dowd, writing the New York Times this weekend, curtains for the Clintons. I mean, brutal, but largely true. What is the point? She talks about going to Toronto to an event with Bill and Hillary Clinton. The hockey rink is half curtained off, but even with that, organizers are scrambling at the last minute to cordon off more sections behind thick black curtains due to lack of sales for the event. And she contrasted, of course, with Michelle Obama's, wildly successful book tour. But
19,000 people in Brooklyn.
But she asked, what is the point? What are the Clintons doing? It's not inspirational. It's not for charity. They're not raising awareness about a cause. They're only raising awareness about the Clintons.
Yeah, and they're lining their own pockets.
but it can't be the money at this point. Number one, and not making as much, but also they've hoovered, writes Dowd, more than $2 billion in contributions to their campaigns, foundation, and philanthropies.
$2 billion?
After the White House, the money grubbing raged on, with the Clintons making more than 700 speeches in a 15-year period, blithely unconcerned with any appearance of avarice or of shady special interests and foreign countries buying influence. They stockpiled a whopping $240 million. Even leading up to the 2016 presidential run, Hillary was packing in the speeches, talking to the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, the American Camp Association, eBay, and, of course, the trifecta of speeches for Goldman Sachs worth $675,000. And then this quote, which applies to the Clintons particularly, but the left generally, and it comes from a liberal, Charlie Peters, the former editor of the Washington Monthly. What scares me most is Hillary's smug certainty of her own virtue as she has become greedy, and how typical that is of so many chic liberals who seem unaware of their own greed. How different the post-presidency for the Clintons have been as compared to the post-presidencies of both Bushes. I think that's something that's worth distinguishing. For more insights on these topics and more, we're pleased to be joined by best-selling author Ronald Kessler, New York Times best-selling author of books on the Secret Service, the FBI, the CIA, and his most recent offering, The Trump White House, Changing the Rules of the Game. Ronald Kessler, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What about your reflections on H.W. Bush, both his presidency and post-presidency?
Well, in my book, The First Family Detail, about the Secret Service, I have a whole chapter on Bush and how he treated Secret Service agents with respect and consideration, in contrast to someone like Hillary, who's still under Secret Service protection, who is so nasty to her agents that being assigned to her detail is considered a form of punishment and the worst assignment in the Secret Service. I have a number of anecdotes, one of which is when Bush was vice president, the Secret Service agents would come out at 3 in the morning looking for the cookies that the stewards would make. So one of the agents, Albrecht, was looking for the cookies, and he heard this voice behind him, where are the cookies? Well, he turned around, it was George H.W. Bush, and so the two of them went looking for the cookies, finally found them, ate them together with milk, and just a touching example of how Bush interacted with other people.
Did any of your
of course,
did any of
go
your
ahead.
agents describe the relationship and the love between H.W. Bush and his wife Barbara?
Yeah, I was just going to say that they had a very, very close, loving relationship. Barbara also was very considerate of her agents. One time they were kind of bunkport. It was freezing out. One of the agents had not brought a hat, and Barbara insisted that they go back to the house and get one of Bush's hats. And the agent said, no, that's not necessary. And Bush said, well, you better do what Barbara says. Also a big contrast with Al Gore, who was Bush's predecessor as vice president. Gore also is one of these people like Hillary who claimed to be a champion of the little people, but yet he couldn't bear to even say Merry Christmas to them when they were out there guarding his property in Tennessee. Tremendous hypocrisy. And speaking of hypocrisy, I have a recent Washington Times op-ed on the dishonest media, the fact that Trump, when he said that California needs to do better forest management, was denounced in the media as just a shameful person, and just could not be more heartless. Well, it turned out subsequently that Governor Jerry Brown, a Democrat, as you know, said the same thing, that they need better forest management. In fact, he had already been moving in that direction. But, of course, the media never apologized or corrected the record on that issue.
Well, going back to H.W. Bush, Brett Baer writing an op-ed, Dana Perino an op-ed, Baer and her basically both get to the same point, which I think you're getting to, is that politics aside, Bush's legacy is his humanity, his decency. He treated people well, and even though he was a person who came from privilege, it didn't radiate from him the way it does from some of the champagne socialists you're talking about.
Yeah, and that example that the New York Times ran in his obit of him seeming to be amazed at a grocery scanner was completely a fabrication.
Yeah,
He was simply looking at how this latest version can figure out labels even if they're torn up, even if they're disheveled. So totally a fiction. You know, during Watergate, I sat next to Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Later, I joined Woodward's investigative team at his invitation. And I know the pressure we were all under the executive editor, Ben Bradley, to be fair and accurate. And any of us would have been fired over the stories that are run now. For example, the New York Times ran a story. The lead was that Roanne Brewer, a model, had barely met Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago when he asked if she wanted to change out of her clothes. Well, wow. It turned out that she had been invited at the last minute to a pool party at Mar-a-Lago. She didn't have time to go back and get a bathing suit. He asked her if she wanted one, and he gave her one. She went in the bathroom, changed, came out. And guess what? The story portrayed this as some demeaning encounter, but in fact, she started dating him and went out with him for several months. Where did that appear in the story? In the 16th paragraph. That's just such a stunning example of the dishonesty of the media.
Yeah, I listened to Sam Donaldson over the weekend. He was on CNN and saying the media now is different than the media back then. Back then, they're held to different standards, and President H.W. Bush knew that.
Yeah. You know, for example, when April Ryan, CNN contributor and radio network reporter, said at a White House briefing that Sarah Sanders must have made up the story that she baked a pecan pie. She insinuated publicly that this was a lie based on nothing, no evidence whatsoever. That person would have been fired immediately back then, and now she goes on CNN all the time pontificating about Trump.
And it's also there was a big story over the weekend that NPR got wrong, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they don't deserve it. But this is with respect to the Cohen plea last week, and the report that NPR published. Trump Jr., Donald Trump Jr.'s 2017 testimony conflicts with Cohen's account of Russian talks, which would be big news, except it's not true. And as somebody pointed out on Twitter, I think from Daily Caller, once you see the transcript, which NPR had, it's really, really hard to see how this happened, this mistake they made. The entire premise of the story was false. And so NPR issues this correction, admitting they mischaracterized an answer Trump Jr. gave to the Senate investigators. But, I mean, the premise of the story is wrong, and so the whole thing is wrong. And this was NPR, not CNN. You know,
in this op-ed, I quote a former National Public Radio CEO Ken Stern as saying that the liberal media bias is pervasive and all of it runs counter to President Trump. When you're a liberal and everyone else around you is as well, it is easy to fall into groupthink on what stories are important, what sources are legitimate, and what the narrative of the day will be. And you know, somehow that, you know, is an attempt to explain what you're talking about, but I don't think any of us can explain it, except that it's just dishonesty. You know, to me, these people are scam artists posing as journalists. I would, you know, it's akin to robbing a bank. It's not criminal, but it's just as dishonest. And you see it every single day in the media. And another example recently was that Trump was denounced again as being heartless when he said that when he used tear gas under his administration against the caravan in trying to cross into the southern border.
Right.
Well, it turned out that the Obama administration had used tear gas 79 times, not once as under Trump, but 79 times. There was never an outcry under Obama, and there were no stories pointing that out when
Right.
Trump was denounced
Well,
as being heartless.
Everything about the D.C. press corps' coverage of the caravan, including the composition of it, yes, Saturday with a convicted murderer arrested who was trying to sneak back into this country as part of the caravan. So, I mean, it's gone from Michael Wolff's, if it sounds true, it probably is, to if you wish it were true, then it is. It seems to be the standard for the D.C. press corps.
You got it. During the campaign, the press portrayed Trump as a failure, as broke. Then after he won, all of a sudden he was portrayed as being so wealthy and that his tentacles were all over the world. No matter what he did, it was some kind of conflict of interest. The stories were run claiming that Trump was simply using money from his father after his father died. Well, it turned out that in 1999, when his father died, Trump was already worth $1.9 billion, according to Forbes. That's just a fact. But, of course, they ignored that.
Yeah.
It's endless.
We could share these stories all morning long. He is Ronald Kessler, New York Times bestselling author, books on the Secret Service, the FBI, CIA, and the new one, the Trump White House Changing the Rules of the Game. Ronald Kessler, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.